Hello, my name is Chef Kevin. I am a nutrition educator with Leah's Pantry, and today we're going to be doing a food demo for the food pharmacy. I'm going to be making a variation of a recipe found on eatfresh.org called baked pears with maple yogurt. Instead of a pear, I'm going to be using pink lady apple. You can use any sort of type of apple or pear. I like pink ladies because they're a little tart and they're not super sweet. So I would recommend using one of these or a Granny Smith apple, but you really can use any type of apple that you want. We're going to be serving that baked apple with some 2% fat Greek yogurt. I prefer to use this type of yogurt because of its protein content, and it helps us stay full. And then we're also going to be making a granola. I'm going to show you how to do a quick stovetop granola. So let's get started. First, I'm just going to take my apple. I've already washed it and cut it. I have my mini toaster oven right here in the back set to 375 degrees Fahrenheit. That's what we're going to be using for this. These pieces can be a little big. It might take a little bit longer for them to cook. So instead of throwing them in a hole like this, I'm just going to cut them up. So they're all about a ½ inch in thick, about an inch to an inch and a half in thickness. All right, now that I've got all my apple pieces, I'm just going to take a little pan. So if you have a toaster oven at home, you can do this with a toaster oven. A regular oven will work. You could even, in theory, microwave these. They'll get soft. They'll get nice and kind of cooked through. But I would say for the most ideal outcome, definitely want to bake them. We have a little baking sheet here covered with foil. I've got 2 apples, just because I decided to do them all together. And what we're going to do here is sprinkle just a little bit of salt. A little bit of salt goes a long way in just bringing out the natural sweetness of many things. I'm going to actually be using just a little bit of butter. You can use butter spread, real butter, really only about a teaspoon. I'm kind of going to be just dropping it around the apples just so it helps them cook. And it gets a little bit of flavor while they're in the oven. It's okay to add a little bit of butter. Yeah, I would say all in all, probably about a teaspoon per apple. So just dropping a little bit of honey, just dropping a little bit of butter, excuse me. And lastly, we are going to be adding maple syrup. So this is just pure maple syrup. You want to use the pure good stuff. Usually comes in a glass bottle. It doesn't have any processed sugars. This is all straight from maple trees. If you do use there's stuff like the pancake syrup that usually contains processed sugars. I would recommend staying away from that stuff. And I'm just going to do a light drizzle kind of all around the apples. It's going to be anywhere from a teaspoon to a tablespoon, depending on how sweet you want it. This is really just to get them to get a little bit of flavor. We can add a little bit of maple syrup at the end as well when we're making our yogurt parfait, our breakfast yogurt parfait. So we're going to pop this in the oven, 375 degrees Fahrenheit for about 20 minutes. So while our apple or pear is baking, we are going to make a stovetop granola. This is a granola that I really love to make. I've made it many times before, and it's super easy to make. All you need is a stove, some oats. So for today's stovetop granola, all you need is about anywhere from a ½ cup to a cup of old-fashioned oats. Typically when I do this, it's just enough to cover the pan. You don't want to do too much more because then you'll get it kind of uneven cooking. Any type of nut, I have pecans that are going to go in there to add a little bit of crunchiness. Just regular old honey. You could use maple syrup as well. I just prefer to use honey. a little bit of salt, a little bit of cooking oil, and one little secret ingredient that I love to use with my granola to give it a little bit of color and a little extra zing is turmeric. So I just have ground turmeric right here in this little baggie. And we're gonna get started. So I'm gonna put this saucepan over a medium-low heat. And like I said, it's about anywhere from a half cup to a cup of granola, oats, just enough to cover the pan. I'm gonna add then a little bit more. And right now, we just want these oats to start to get nice and toasty, nice and brown. So I'm gonna have them on there for about 3 minutes, just to let them getting nice and toasty. In the meantime, you can get everything else for your granola. So we're gonna get our salt, our honey. I'm gonna get a little spatula to mix it up. You totally do not need to make your own granola. This is just an extra step. You could just use store-bought granola. When you are looking at store-bought granola, make sure to check for added sugars. Make sure to check for the ingredients. A lot of times there are different nuts in our granola, so find one that suits your diets or your needs. And if you can't, then I recommend trying to make one at home because it can be really, really simple. Got a little spatula, just gonna mix this up. Make sure that these oats are all getting nice and toasty. As the oats are getting nice and toasty, I'm just gonna start breaking up some pecans by hand. You can chop them up too, but this is just so they have slightly smaller pieces in the granola at the end. After a couple minutes on the heat, you'll start smelling the oats. That's a really good indicator that they're getting ready to proceed with the next step. But you don't want to smell any burning, so if you smell burning, lower the heat and go at a slightly slower pace. Alright, I've got my pecans here ready. It's about half a cup. So now that my oats are getting nice and toasty and everything's warmed up, I'm actually going to add just about a teaspoon of a neutral cooking oil, something like canola oil, corn oil, vegetable oil, anything like that will work. And this cooking oil for the stovetop granola, it just helps really cook the oats so they don't taste raw when we're eating them in the granola. The oil just allows the oats to get to a higher temperature, and it introduces just a little bit of fat, which I think goes a long way in this granola. So don't be scared. Don't add too much. You'll notice the color gets a little bit darker as the oats kind of absorb the fat, absorb the oil. If you don't want to use canola oil, you certainly could use butter, just depending on what your preference is and what you can eat. Alright. It's getting nice and toasty. I'm going to let them go for about another minute, and then I'm going to add these chopped up, broken up pecans. Alright, these oats have been on the stovetop for about 5 minutes total. So I'm going to go ahead and add in my pecans just to get them nice and warmed up, get them a little toasty as well. If you see any weirdly colored pecans or any ones that are soft, just set those aside. They might be a little stale or a little old. But as long as they don't taste super rancid or are giving off a weird smell, they should be completely fine. And at this point, I'm going to add in just a pinch of salt. It's about a quarter teaspoon, maybe a half teaspoon at most. And then I'm going to be adding in some turmeric. I would say I add in about a teaspoon of turmeric per half cup of oats or per cup of oats. So you'll see that nice, beautiful yellow color. And once we start mixing it up, it'll get incorporated into all of those oats. The turmeric will give it a nice herbal smell. It almost smells kind of like honey too. Kind of has a gingery smell. I think it goes really, really well with this granola. It just gives it kind of a different taste, a different smell. Makes it more unique. Let that come all together. Kind of want just everything to be nice and hot, nice and warm together. So after you add in your spice, your salt, gonna probably take it for another 2 or 3 minutes because we don't want the spices to burn, but I do want these pecans to get nice and warm. It's been about 10 minutes total that we've been cooking this granola, these oats, and the final step after we've toasted our oats, after we've used a little bit of oil, added in our nuts, added in spices, and a little bit of honey, a little bit of salt, excuse me, our last step is to add honey. So the honey is going to make it sweet and also make it clump up and come together, and give it that more typical kind of crunchy, clumpy granola that we're used to seeing in the store. So before I do that, I'm going to give this one last little mix, and I'm going to turn the heat completely off. So I've turned off my induction burner. You would just turn off your stovetop, whatever you're using to cook. And now I'm going to be adding the honey. You can add, I would say for about a half cup of oats like we have here, it's necessary to add at least somewhere around a tablespoon of honey. So what the honey is going to do is just, I'm going to stream it in, and slowly is going to start clumping up. After I've done this, I'll just mix it up. You'll hear a little bit of honey start to sizzle. That's totally okay. That's part of the reason why we've turned it off, just because we don't want it to burn the honey. Alright, and now we mix. As you see, it's starting to clump up now as opposed to being really loose, how it was a little while ago before we introduced the honey. Let me turn on this light here. And as long as it's looking like most of those oats have touched some honey, kind of are a little bit clumpy, then it's the right amount. If it was still really, really loose and really moved around a lot in the pot when you shook it like that, then we would add more honey, but I think this is probably just enough, You could add a little bit more if you want it to be sweeter, if you're not sure. I'm just gonna take off the rest from the spoon and just toss it in there. And then the next thing that we're going to do is transfer this to a plate so that it cools. And as it cools, and as that honey kind of becomes thicker, crystallizes almost, it'll start to come together. And it might even become like one big puck that we'll have to break apart. But it'll be really nice and crunchy, so that's what we're looking for. So now that we're done cooking our granola on the stovetop, we're going to move it over to a plate. This is just going to make the process of it cooling a little bit faster so that it's ready to be used and so that it clumps up and hardens like a traditional granola. So just spread it out as thin as you can on the plate. It'll just make it cool down a lot faster. And as it cools down, you'll notice it'll start to kind of clump up and become more like a traditional granola. That is our turmeric pecan granola, made all on a stovetop in about 10 minutes. All right, my timer went off for the apples, so I'm just gonna pull those out of my little toaster oven. Here are our baked apples. Again, they were in with a little bit of salt, a little bit of maple syrup, and a little bit of butter in the oven at 375 degrees for 20 minutes. They're nice and hot. What you're looking for here is for the apples to be soft to the touch, and they are very soft. almost soft to the point where if you blended them, it'd be kind of like a nice applesauce. And you notice I kept the peels on these apples. The peels have fiber. They're a great source of nutrition for us to make us feel full. So I'm gonna jump a little bit ahead. You can wait for those apples to cool down, but I'm gonna get started on plating a portion here. So what we're gonna do is take a spoon, take a serving, or a little bit less than a serving of our Greek yogurt. Put it on a nice plate. I like to do this thing where I take one big glob of the Greek yogurt and then I kind of push it across the plate, excuse me. And that way it just covers a little bit more of the plate. And then we can put our apples just straight on there. Change this lighting a little bit, see if we can see it better. So then we're going to put our apples, I'm going to put 2 of these pieces on there. Actually, I'm going to do 3. They're nice and hot. And then the last piece, the last thing that goes on top is this granola. As I mentioned, as it cools, it gets a little bit harder, so now it's clumped up. And just put a nice, healthy serving of granola all over this. You can add a little bit of maple syrup if you're looking for something a little bit sweeter, but go ahead and give it a try without the maple syrup, the additional maple syrup. I think you'll be surprised, that just the apples have their natural sweetness, and the granola, of course, is slightly sweetened with honey. All right, and I'm gonna give this a bite. Bon appetit. It almost tastes like a little deconstructed apple pie. But this is something that you could enjoy for breakfast. As kind of a amped up yogurt parfait. We have our Greek yogurt. Again, this is 2% Greek yogurt, has higher protein content, a little bit of fat, but it's okay. It makes us feel fuller, helps us stay fuller for the day. We have our homemade granola with oats, has some fiber in it. Also the pecans has some more fat and protein to keep us full. And then apples, very little added sugar. So give this a try and let me know what you think. Again, this is Chef Kevin with Leah's Pantry and the Food Pharmacy. Hope you enjoy.